Okay, try number two. I apologize if you hopped on to the last one. Hello, welcome to the party. Sorry, I was having some technical issues. We were not connecting to the Wi-Fi. It was so sad. It was struggling. I'm super excited about this topic today, though. This is probably one of the most requested topics that I get asked to talk about. This is, hi, Guy. This is one of the things that, welcome. How have you been? How's your weekend been? If you're hopping on, let me know how are you, what you're up to right now. But yeah, this is probably one of the most requested topics that I've been asked to talk about. So I'm super excited to get into this topic of how to lose fat and build muscle at the same damn time. And one of the reasons that I love talking about this is because, well, I think one, like for those of you who don't know very much about my story, which by the way, if you end up watching the replay, let me know, Team Replay, in the comments. If you don't know my story, how I sort of got started in health and fitness was I was 6'3". I told this story a couple times this week, but I was about 160 pounds soaking wet. So I'm about 200 pounds now for reference. And I was just really skinny, and I was motivated to build some muscle and build some size. And in the process of initially learning how to add on some muscle, how to add on some size, I was eating more, and I noticed that I was gaining fat and gaining muscle. And now, depending on which method that you end up trying to implement to build muscle, some of this can happen as part of the process. But I know for me, I was like, I'm not really interested in the whole like gaining the fat process. Like, I'm not doing more on purpose for the purpose of building muscle. And a lot of my clients over the years have expressed the same frustrations and the same fears and had that same concerns around like, why am I doing all this work to see my fat grow as my muscles grow? Or on the other end of it, what I've also seen, and the other reason that I'm excited to talk about this is I've experienced some people who go and do the fat loss process without being focused on building muscle. So what happens for those people is, let's say you lose 40, 50 pounds, and it's great, you're a smaller version of yourself, you're happier or whatever, but because you didn't build muscle, what's happening is you're not any toner. You're not any tighter. Your body isn't any more defined. And I don't know about you, but if I went through the process of losing 30 to 50 pounds, I'd be really happy about that. But on the other side of that, my goal would still be to see a tighter, stronger, leaner version of myself. And a lot of times for people who end up on the other side of that equation, who have issues with loose skin or whatever it is, could have avoided some of those issues and could have made it easier along the way by applying the principles of strength training, resistance training, and building muscle. So enough intro. Hi, Kayla. Welcome to the party. Love seeing you here. How's your day going? How's prep going? Let me know. So I was just explaining why this topic is important to me. Kayla knows all about this, being on prep right now. So the first myth that I want to clear up, I always like to clear up myths on these, is that losing fat and building muscle at the same time is possible, right? But we got to throw a little asterisk in there and say that it's possible with varying degrees of success. So there's a few things, glad to hear you're doing well, that influence the success of, this is called a recomposition phase, if you want to know the technical term for this, or a recomp, right? So a lot of bodybuilders, we go through a bulking phase. Hey, Corey, welcome to the party. A lot of bodybuilders, oh, nice. I need to check that out. A lot of bodybuilders will end up going through a bulking phase where they're gaining fat and muscle, and then a cutting phase where they're focused on cutting fat and preserving muscle. And that's actually the most common way to do it. It's the most aggressive and the most successful way to do it. But I've had lots of clients successfully recomp over the years. So I want to share that with you. Some of the things that influence your ability to successfully lose fat and build muscle at the same time are going to be your years of experience working out or lifting. I don't know. I need to figure that out. I need to figure out if my bodybuilding show is going to be streamed. So your years of experience lifting influence that, as well as your conditioning, which is basically a fancy way of saying how in shape you are, and then your body fat percentage. So specifically on all of those things, the more experience that you have lifting, the less effective that a recomp phase is going to be. And it's just because your muscles are conditioned. It's like one of the, you take it as part of your journey. Just like the more years that you've been lifting, the less natural potential that you have to gain muscle. So it doesn't mean that you can't gain muscle, but for example, for someone who has 1 year of experience lifting, a male, we'll take it for example, you could gain up to 1.2% of your body weight in muscle per month. And that same male, you put them with 6 years of experience lifting, and you probably could only gain 0.25 to 0.5% in your body weight and muscle per month. So that over time, your capacity in general, when you are consistently correctly lifting in combination with consistently and correctly eating right, your genetic potential dramatically increases for building muscle. So naturally, your potential to successfully recomp also kind of decreases. On conditioning, what I've noticed is and it's kind of the same thing with less years of experience. Give me some likes, some comments, some hearts if this is all making sense to you so far. The same thing when we talk about conditioning or being in shape. The more in shape that you already are, the more muscle that you already have, the more used to your body being in the gym that you are, the less likely it is for this to be a possibility for you. And this can be locally too. So when I say local, I mean, don't tell me that you have the set of conditions of like you're an advanced lifter, even if you had 6 years experience lifting, but you haven't lifted in 7 months, right? If no matter how many years that you have lifted, if you haven't been to the gym in 7 damn months, right? Like the chances are your body is deconditioned is what it's called. So AKA you're out of shape, no shame, no shade in that. We've all had those phases. But you are on the end of actually having a high potential of being able to lose fat and build muscle at the same time. And then like once you get back into your rhythm, that potential decreases. And that doesn't mean that you can't lose fat and build muscle. You just might have to take a different approach. So hopefully this is making sense so far. And then what we've also noticed, a lot of studies have shown that people who have higher body fat percentages, you just have a lot of stored energy on your body. So, in the beginning of your fitness journey, a lot of people who are on that end of the spectrum, especially if they're out of shape as well, because you can have a high body fat percentage and be in shape. I've had clients who had 40% body fat, but they had a fuck ton of muscle as well. They just did a really shitty job of managing their diet in the process of building muscle. So happens to the best of us, but yes, so body fat percentage, high body fat, your body can convert some of your stored energy into muscle, which means that you tend to have, in the beginning of your fitness journey, a more successful rate. So how do we do it now that we understand that the success of it really kind of depends on a lot of factors, but it is very much possible? The first thing to consider is your diet. So when we're talking about your diet for when you're trying to lose fat and build muscle at the same time, aka recomp, you want to be eating a maintenance calorie. So a lot of you who are on the video right now, you've been in a lot of these talks with me, so you know that the way I teach my clients to figure out their calories is by their TDEE, which if you need a resource to help you do that inside of this group, there's actually a PDF that's called How to Calculate Your Calories for Fat Loss. So if you need that, comment this and I'll tag you under it, or you can just search around either way. But in that document, it teaches you how to calculate your TDEE. And what you want to find is that you are eating right at your TDEE, which is basically how much calories you should be eating per day. So, and the thing about maintenance calories that is important to consider, right? It's just like when you're trying to lose fat, we've talked about this, or when you're trying to build muscle, we've talked about this too. Your metabolism is always a moving target. So even if you calculate that your TDEE is, let's say, 2,000 calories to make it easy, if, for example, you're eating 2,000 calories for a couple months or a couple weeks, but your physical activity level increases either because, let's say you go from a desk job to working on your feet, you've added in an extra lift per week, or let's say you're doing more cardio, then you'll actually start losing weight if you don't increase your calories to compensate for the fact that your physical activity level has increased, because your physical activity level is one of the biggest influences on your TDEE. So once again, give me some likes, some hearts, if that makes sense. Part of your job is to understand what your maintenance calories is, and part of your job is to understand that your maintenance calories are a moving target. So if you're changing the factors that influence your metabolism, like the amount of workouts that you're doing, like the amount of cardio that you're doing, like your total non-exercise physical activity. So are you walking an extra 2,000 steps per day? Are you more physically active? Are you working at a restaurant instead of working at a desk job? Those are the sort of things that are going to make sure that you are keeping track of the moving target that is your metabolism in a recomposition phase. And the other way to keep track of that, honestly, is by just making sure you're stepping on the scale at least once a week. I will say if this is the first time that you've ever tried to recomp, you should be stepping on the scale every day. Like 5 days after when you've already lost 2 pounds because your calories were way too low, for example, is like you can lose those 3 pounds if you want to. But on the first week, stepping on the scale every day, for example, to just make sure that that number is accurate. Because if you have sort of any dramatic jumps and then stable out or versus keep jumping down, like these are considerations that can help us make changes earlier to make sure that we stay on target. So we're quiet today. That's okay. I'm going to assume that means that you all understand everything that I'm saying so far. And if you have questions, you'll put them in the chat later. So I'm going to move on. The next piece of being able to recomp or lose fat and build muscle at the same time is making sure that your workouts are dialed in. So I'm going to talk about this in 2 ways. Resistance training and cardio. So for most of my clients who are trying to do this, we want you to be lifting at least 3 times a week, because if you're trying to build muscle and not maintaining muscle, you actually need to be lifting consistently enough to train most of your muscle groups at least twice per week. And then depending on your genetics, you might need some muscle groups to only be trained once, or you might, that's not as common, but sometimes people need certain muscle groups to be trained 3 times versus 2. So like for me, for example, I've talked about this before, really I only need to train my arms 4 sets twice per week, and my arms will grow consistently over time and get stronger and stronger. I used to try to train them 3 times a week, and I found that my arms were always getting injured. They were not growing no matter what I did. So my genetics determined, and my experimentation helped me figure out that doing too much was not helping me. But everyone's a little different. So we talked about resistance training at least 3 times a week. We talked about figuring out a system to where you can train most of your muscle groups at least twice per week. And then just like if whether you're trying to lose fat or build muscle or do both at the same time, the 2 most important things we want to make sure that you're focusing on when you're actually in the gym lifting weights. The first thing is mind-muscle connection. I've talked about this and I'm going to keep drilling it in for you all, right? Mind-muscle connection is really about being in your mind, being in your muscles, in your head when you're at the gym, right? So when we're doing a bicep curl, I'll stand up. When we're doing a bicep curl, we're not just flailing our arm around. Anybody in here do bicep curls like this? Anyways, but it's really like being in your mind so that mentally you're visualizing your bicep pull your forearm up towards the top of your bicep, and you're feeling the bicep and the bottom head of the bicep stretch as that exercise. Because what happens if in a bicep curl, for example, if we're not in our head, if we're not visualizing the pulling motion happen, if we're not visualizing our wrist staying straight, if we're not visualizing that muscle getting bigger and then stretching out as we go down, then what's happening is we might be using our back because we're pushing our shoulder blade forward when we're curling every time because we're going, or we're activating our anterior delta, our front and shoulder, because we don't stop when the bicep gets at that full contraction. We actually pull forward with our shoulder and we bring the shoulder in. So being specific about that mind-muscle connection is going to be key to maximize your potential to be able to actually build the muscles that you're trying to build while you're losing fat. And the other really important thing that I wanted to make sure that we're all focusing on in the gym is going to be time over tension. This is such an underrated thing. So a lot of clients come to me with either 2 camps, and you can let me know in the comments which camp that you're on, or maybe you're already doing this, but you used to exist on either camp where either you're trying to just get shit done as fast as possible, right? Or you're really fucking turtle slow with every lift because you're scared that you're going to do it wrong and you heard that you have to be slow to get it right, right? So this is really just about, regardless of whatever camp you're on or where you are now, this is really just about knowing what that should be, right? So like a lot of times it's just, there's two phases of a lift. I'll stand up for this. You have the eccentric, right? So that's when your muscle is getting longer. So in a bicep curl, it's when you're coming down this way, and concentric, or when your muscle is getting shorter or contracting when it's coming up this way. So just being specific about should it be, a lot of times you want to do a fast contraction and then a slower lengthening of the muscle, because it's in the lengthening where you are actually tearing the muscles. And that's where you're going to get the most bang for the buck in the eccentric phase of a lift. So that's enough about strength training, I think. Give me some hearts if that makes sense. The other thing that is important in a recomposition phase, losing fat, building muscle at the same time, is going to be cardio. So you are going to have to do cardio to be able to do this. And the cardio, the main reason is it's going to be the biggest place where you can intentionally lose fat. So we talk about the strength training because strength training is important in building muscle, which that's half the job. I'm glad you're following me, Guy. Yes. Strength training is an important piece of this in the context of building the muscle, but actually the more muscle you have, the more fat that your body, the potential that your body has to build fat. So that's a win-win. But then cardio is essential as well. So what I talked about many times in this group is having a baseline. So don't just do 90 minutes of cardio one week and 120 minutes of cardio another week and 30 minutes of cardio another week, because you'll never know what your TDEE is, which we talked about, because your physical activity level will be constantly changing, and you also won't have any consistent variables to manipulate. So I would say most people who are trying to recomp, you could honestly start at an hour, 60 minutes of cardio per week. And then what happens as you go through the phase, and maybe you potentially hit a plateau for just a week, is cardio, the amount of cardio you're doing can be the first thing that you manipulate, that isn't going to require you to break down your muscle or, kind of fuck up your calories and your caloric potential there. So I do recommend doing LIST, so low intensity steady state. We talked about this last week, but basically, you're kind of in that 50 to 65% of your maximum heart rate zone. So what I tell a lot of my clients for LIST is, like, if you're walking, this is basically the fastest walk that you can do without jogging or running. So I always imagine that I'm like Karen walking uphill in the suburbs, talking to my friend like, you never believe what Sally said to me the other day. It's kind of that intense pace. So you should still be able to talk. You should be breaking a sweat. And for a lot of my clients, that looks like 120 to 140 beats per minute, somewhere in that range. And then something that I will say that you can use, for example, instead of necessarily tweaking cardio time right away, is, let's say, for low intensity steady state, you're tracking your heart rate, you're doing your 60 minutes per week, and you notice that your average heart rate is 120 beats per minute. There's no judgment there, but one way that if you're hitting plateaus or something, or you want to up the amount of fat that you're losing, is you can set a goal week by week to increase what your average heart rate is. So I'll do this a lot. So let's say you find it's 120, and the next week you want to go for 125, and the next week you want to go for 130, and the next week you want to go for 135, and the next week you want to go for 140 average. And so what you're doing is you're increasing the intensity while staying in the same type of cardio. LIST is important. We talked about this last week, because when you do high intensity cardio, so anywhere where your heart rate's getting closer to that 70 to 85% or more of your one rate max, you're burning carbs. It's okay if you're burning carbs, but carbs are just, but if you want to burn fat specifically, you want to keep that heart rate a little lower. And the cool thing about doing LIST too is that you're actually going to burn more calories throughout the rest of the day because of the oxygen deficit that you created from the LIST. Okay, so that was a lot of theoretical. Hopefully that makes sense. So I want to give you guys a case study, because I think that examples are so helpful, and I've had a lot of clients who've actually successfully done this. So one perfect example is my client Trevor. So when he came to me, I think he weighed about 140 pounds. He was an ex-athlete, so he played hockey in high school. So he had 6 years of experience lifting, and he also had experience tracking his meals, and he, for the most part, he ate a healthy diet. He, like some of the best of us, would binge eat sugar sometimes when he was craving carbs, and that's something that we got to work on. So I think that before he came to me, he was bulking. So he's eating around 2,400 calories a day, and we immediately dropped his calories to 2,000. At 2,000 calories per day, he was not losing fat because I measure my client's body fat, and he was not losing weight. And he also was not hungry, which, by the way, if you're not hungry ever, there's a good chance that you're not in a caloric deficit, or at least like you're not in that maintenance. You're not in a phase that's going to help you lose fat. If you're full all the time, you're most likely in a caloric surplus. So, yes, what was I saying? So his goal was to lose fat and build muscle. So we had started at that 2,000 calories. We had him doing 5 lifts per week. We also had him doing that. We started him out at 60 minutes of cardio per week. And like I said, he was never hungry. He was not losing weight. So we ended up over 4 weeks decreasing his calories 150 at a time down to 1,700 calories. And so at 1,700 calories, his weight stayed at 140, but we kept his lifts at 5 lifts per week. We did increase his cardio to 90 minutes per week, and he actually stayed at 140 for 8 weeks straight. But the coolest thing was, over that 8 weeks, because we had his cardio dialed in, because we had his lifts dialed in, because he consistently executed a proper technique, and because we successfully figured out that 17 was his TDEE at the time, he actually went from 17% to 7% body fat over those 8 weeks. So he definitely hit his goal, and at 7% body fat for a guy, you're seeing abs, you're seeing your muscle definition, you're seeing lots of veins, and it feels really freaking good. So, yeah, that's a perfect example of how we leverage all those variables we talked about, and even someone who had a lot of experience in the gym was able to kind of find their TDE for a recon phase, losing fat, building muscle at the same time, and ride it out for 2 months. And what a lot of people would have made the mistake of doing was they would have seen that Trevor was not losing weight, so they would have decreased his calories. And what would have happened was he would have lost more muscle than necessary in that phase, right? Because if you're losing fat, you are losing some muscle. If you're doing a good job, if you got all the variables dialed in, you lose about 20%. A fat versus 80, or you lose 80% fat, 20% muscle, and then the less your details are dialed in, the more it becomes that you're losing more muscle than fat. So hopefully that makes sense, and that example was clear to you all. So looks like we're dropping off. If you have any questions about anything that I said today, please feel free to comment them right now or under this video. And as always, if you have any topics that you want to discuss in our weekly live trainings, you can also comment or send me a private message. And I appreciate everyone who took the time to be on here today. Alrighty. Yeah, I'm just going to hop off, but let me know if you have any questions. Have an amazing day.